chair recognizes the Honourable the member for Burin-Grand Bank.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll commence my remarks today by wishing my fellow female members of this honourable House a rewarding Happy International Women's Day. And though most would agree that women in Canada, and indeed in our own province of Newfoundland and Labrador, have some ways to go before we can claim we live in a truly gender-equal society, today in particular, we should all take time to think about those areas of the world where females can only dream of having the freedoms and opportunities we have here in our province, Mr. Speaker. All struggles for basic human rights, whether based on gender or any other factor, are struggles for all of humanity. And none of us can ever claim to be free while others are chained and bounded by sexism, racism, or any of the dozens of other isms that pollute the thinking of way too many, Mr. Speaker. Let's work together to make sure that one day there will be no need for an International Women's Day, Mr. Speaker, because gender equality will be a given. Last week in this honourable House, we came together to share our opinions on how to attract more women into leadership roles and into politics. And before I lend my thoughts on wage equality for women, I want to reflect on equality for women in general, especially in politics, Mr. Speaker, and since time constraints prevented me from doing so last week. I found it very interesting to learn that in 1930, only 34 women have been elected to this honourable House, Mr. Speaker. In the 85 years since Lady Helena Squires was elected as our first female representative, right up to the 2015 election, less than 3 dozen women have been afforded the privilege of having a voice in the nations, because that's what we were at the time, Mr. Speaker, a nation, and now the province's legislature. There are those who would argue that we should expect progress in this area to be slow, that we should accept a slow evolution to increased female representation in this honourable House, Mr. Speaker. After all, we have grown from 1 female representative in 1930 to 10 of us here today. That sounds like progress to some. 10 of us, 1/4 of the total representation in this honourable House, despite the fact we are more than half the population, Mr. Speaker. But it took us 85 years to get to this point. We cannot and we will not wait another 85 years, which would put us at the year 2100 before we can claim equality. Mr. Speaker, we cannot wait until the next century before we can realize the dream of equal voice, the dream of the women who the women rather, who participated in the Daughters of the Vote session held here recently. There has been progress, there is no doubt about it. We've seen our first female premier. We've seen women taking on cabinet positions where they have and continue to thrive. As females, we prove time and time again we are up to the task, Mr. Speaker. We have 3 female cabinet ministers, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Natural Resources, the Minister of Children, Seniors and Social Development, who are all up to the task, Mr. Speaker. The member for Cartwright-Lansinclair, our Deputy Speaker, is definitely up to the task. And listening to the member for Harbour Grace, Portagrave, and the member for Harbour Main represent the interests of their constituents in this House during the past year, I know they too are up to the task, Mr. Speaker. And though, of course, I do not always agree with the members on the opposite side of this House, I have no reservation in saying the 3 female members opposite are also up to the task, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I humbly submit that as Government Whip, I too am up to the task.
Hear, 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 hear.
Mr. Speaker, we are ready. Women are ready for an equal voice. And that is not to imply that every female out there will offer herself for public office next election. Just as with men, there are many valuable roles for women to play in society, some of them leadership roles, some not. CEOs and managers, assembly line workers and home care providers, teachers and nurses, just as for men. Not everyone, neither male nor female, has a desire to come into this honourable House and do what we do, Mr. Speaker. The vast majority of people will not choose this path, and that's perfectly okay. Last week's resolution was not about convincing women that they should be offering themselves for public office, it was about creating an atmosphere where women who are interested are not stymied by obstacles that males do not have to worry about. It was about creating a consciousness in the general population that women have something to offer, that if given the chance, we can do the job, Mr. Speaker. I suppose, compared to some, I was lucky to have grown up in an environment where politics was very important and where I was always invited to participate. Even before hitting my teenage years, I was side by side with my late grandfather putting up campaign posters to support our local candidate. I was just 14 years old when I attended my first convention, Mr. Speaker, and I haven't missed a provincial one since.
Hear, hear.
My mother blazed a trail for me when she took on the role of deputy mayor in my hometown in the 1980s. Another way in which she has been a great role model, Mr. Speaker. I willingly took on leadership roles with provincial and federal associations. And if that wasn't immersion enough, Mr. Speaker, I spent 8 years as special assistant to Minister Judy Foote. It was that immersion in politics that gave me the confidence to seek office in the last 2 provincial elections. I would never suggest I was destined to be an elected official. Destiny does not earn us a seat in this honourable House, Mr. Speaker. Rather, an atmosphere that nurtures confidence, an atmosphere that allows you to grow as a person. A society that can see beyond skin color and ethnic background, beyond religion, and dozens of other inconsequential variables, including gender. Those are the things that help level the playing field so that all, including women, who feel they have something to offer will do so and will be given due consideration when the populace heads to the polls to cast their votes. When we have true equality, it won't be measured by an assembly of 40 being comprised of exactly 20 males and exactly 20 females, Mr. Speaker. It will be measured by a society where everyone feels free to offer himself or herself for office and where the electorate votes for the best candidate, period. Mr. Speaker, I submit that if 2 heads are better than one, then 2 halves are also better than one. And the half of us who are female are ready to prove that point. After much discussion and debate, we resolved to do what we can to attract more women to leadership and political roles. A very positive move for sure, Mr. Speaker. I was proud to support that resolution. Hopefully it will pay dividends and we will see positive results as we move forward. For any female who enters into this field, throws her hat into the ring, as it were, and gets elected to represent her district here in the House of Assembly, she can be certain that the amount of compensation she receives, her salary, will be the same as that of any of her male counterparts, Mr. Speaker. I represent the good people of the district of Burin-Grand, and I get paid the same salary as my counterpart representing Placentia West Bellevue, or any other of my male colleagues in this honourable House, Mr. Speaker, and that's how it should be. A female teacher with the same experience and educational background as a male teacher will receive the same salary in our province. Equal pay for equal work. When work can be viewed fairly objectively, the story on pay equity is encouraging, Mr. Speaker. It's when subjectivity creeps into the thinking that things go askew. It's then we see disparity, Mr. Speaker. When we look at the overall picture of wages in our province, and indeed our country, there is reason for concern. Let's consider Canada as a whole. Whenever we look at Canada on a global scale, we ooze pride, Mr. Speaker. There is no area when we are not at the top or near the top when it comes to progressive thinking and development, or so we are prone to think. But let's consider this. The World Economic Forum, when it conducted a recent study on gender gap rate rankings, put Canada at a distant and dismal 30th place. Yes, Mr. Speaker, 30th, not 3rd, 30th.
Wow.
And ironically, though there has been some progress over the years, the gap is still quite significant among the younger, more educated in our society. One would think that in an enlightened society, there would be no noticeable gap between youth or young educated males and young educated females, Mr. Speaker. From this, I gather it takes longer for professional females starting out to prove themselves than it does professional males at the same age. On average, women in Newfoundland and Labrador are earning only 83% that of males. If we omit professions such as teaching, where pay equity is already a reality, then obviously there are many areas in which the gap is much wider. That is totally unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. How can we talk about equality for women while leaving something as basic as pay equity on the back burner? Mr. Speaker, it is my understanding that 6 provinces have such legislation at the present time. Newfoundland and Labrador is one of the 3 provinces that has a framework for pay equity and has resulted in closing the gap in the public sector. That was certainly an important step along the way. That was progress. But we have to ask ourselves if that's good enough. And I think, Mr. Speaker, the obvious answer is no. The women of this province who fought to get women the right to vote, they were trailblazers. Without their determination, 10 of us would not be here today, Mr. Speaker. We are indebted to them for this opportunity to come forward and offer ourselves to contribute to the public good. In the intervening years since being granted the vote in 1925, we have seen progress for women. There is no doubt about that, Mr. Speaker. But unfortunately, there remains adherents of that regressive thinking that has kept women as a whole from reaching true equality. Mr. Speaker, fields that were once considered exclusively male are finally opening doors to females. Today, we see a steadily increasing number of female welders, carpenters, heavy equipment operators, mechanics, and the list goes on and on. These are often good-paying jobs, and we have to ensure that females receive the same compensation as their male counterparts, Mr. Speaker. Again, equal pay for equal work. In the business world, females also have much catching up to do. Our corporations are top-heavy with male executives, while females have been expected to content themselves with lower-paying positions. When we learn that only 2 of Canada's 100 highest-earning CEOs are female, we know we have work to do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to stand in support of today's private member's motion on pay equity. Thank you so much.
Here.